first circles appeared during a routine winter irrigation audit on a grain farm several kilometers outside the nearest rural highway junction. A series of soil moisture probes installed along the eastern field perimeter had been reporting inconsistent readings during a period when the entire region was locked in stable sub-freezing temperatures. Snow cover across the surrounding farmland measured nearly 20 centimeters deep, yet aerial imagery from an agricultural monitoring drone revealed dozens of exposed patches of dark soil scattered across the field. Each patch formed a circle. Not irregular melt zones, not wind-cleared patches, and not the uneven footprints of agricultural equipment. Every opening in the snowpack displayed a near-perfect boundary. White snow ended abruptly along a curved perimeter, and within that perimeter, the ground remained completely bare, as if the snowfall had never settled there at all. The geometry was immediately difficult to reconcile with the environmental conditions recorded across the valley. Air temperatures had remained below freezing for more than 40 consecutive hours. Wind movement during the storm had been minimal, eliminating drift patterns that might have stripped snow from specific areas. The field itself had been left untouched since the previous harvest cycle. No vehicles had crossed it, and no heating infrastructure existed beneath the soil. Yet the drone imagery showed more than 30 circular openings scattered across the farmland. Each circle averaged between 2 and 3 meters in diameter. The soil inside them was wet but unfrozen. Field technicians initially suspected a localized irrigation malfunction. Subsurface water lines occasionally leak beneath agricultural plots, producing melt zones where warm groundwater rises through colder soil layers. That explanation would normally produce irregular thawed areas where water accumulates before refreezing at the edges. The circles in the eastern field showed none of that behavior. Their edges were sharply defined. Snow crystals along the boundary remained intact, while the interior remained entirely clear. When technicians stepped into one of the circles during the initial inspection, their boots pressed into soft mud rather than frozen ground. Temperature probes pushed into the soil produced another inconsistency. The surface inside the circle measured slightly above freezing. 3 meters away, outside the boundary, the ground temperature remained several degrees below zero. No gradient connected the two measurements. The change occurred directly at the circular boundary. Investigators extended their inspection outward across the field. Each circle displayed the same thermal condition. Snow remained stable outside the perimeter, while soil inside the circles remained just warm enough to prevent accumulation. The pattern suggested a localized environmental condition rather than a subsurface heat source. Agricultural records confirmed that nothing had been installed beneath the field during the previous decade that might produce thermal leakage. No geothermal conduits crossed the farmland. No irrigation heaters existed within the system. The soil composition across the region contained no known mineral pockets capable of producing localized heat release during winter freezing cycles. Despite that absence of explanation, the circles persisted. Snowfall continued through the following night. Morning inspection revealed that the snowpack had increased uniformly across the valley, covering fences, farm structures, and roadways under an additional layer of powder. Across the eastern field, the circles remained open exactly as before. The snow had accumulated around them. It had not entered them. Drone imaging during the following afternoon revealed another change that complicated the initial irrigation hypothesis. The number of circles across the field had increased. Where the previous survey had documented 32 openings, the new survey counted 47. They had not appeared randomly. The additional circles formed along the outer perimeter of the original pattern, expanding the distribution outward from the center of the field in a loose radial arrangement. Each new circle displayed the same geometry and identical thermal condition measured during the first inspection. The circles did not overlap. They remained evenly spaced. Soil analysis samples taken from within the circles revealed no chemical anomaly capable of producing heat generation. Moisture levels were consistent with ordinary winter soil thaw cycles that occur during brief temperature fluctuations. Yet the meteorological records showed no such fluctuation during the period in question. Air temperatures had remained steadily below freezing. Despite that stability, the circles remained clear of snow. A small disagreement developed among the technicians reviewing the drone footage that afternoon. One of the field engineers suggested that the pattern might represent residual thermal behavior from underground irrigation pipes installed decades earlier, their location perhaps forgotten after property ownership changes. Another engineer pointed out that the circles did not align with the documented irrigation grid used throughout the valley. The spacing was wrong. The farm owner eventually confirmed that no subsurface piping existed beneath that portion of the field at all. The eastern acreage had always relied on surface irrigation channels rather than buried infrastructure. That clarification eliminated the most straightforward explanation. Further inspection introduced another inconsistency. During the third morning survey, technicians noticed that several circles had shifted slightly from their earlier positions. The change was subtle. Their locations had not moved far enough to be visible from ground level, but aerial overlays comparing drone imagery from consecutive days revealed that some circles no longer occupied the same coordinates recorded during the first survey. The pattern had adjusted. The circles had not simply appeared and remained fixed within the snowfield. They had repositioned. The displacement measured only a few meters in most cases, yet the movement displayed an unusual consistency. Circles located near the center of the field tended to remain stable, while those along the outer edges drifted outward over the following days. Snowfall continued intermittently throughout the week. Each storm produced the same result. Snow accumulated across the farmland until it reached the circular boundaries where it stopped. The exposed soil inside the circles remained unfrozen despite the surrounding conditions. During overnight freezes, the temperature contrast persisted without spreading into neighboring ground. No melting runoff formed along the edges. The snow simply did not remain inside the circles. Agricultural monitoring drones continued mapping the field during routine irrigation oversight. The imagery produced a pattern that gradually attracted attention beyond the farm itself. The circles had begun expanding beyond the eastern acreage. Several new openings appeared along the narrow service road running beside the field. Snow along the gravel shoulder remained intact except where the circular boundaries crossed it. Inside those boundaries, the gravel surface remained exposed, exactly matching the soil conditions within the field. Vehicles passing along the road occasionally drove through the circles without noticing anything unusual. Drivers reported no temperature difference inside the vehicle cabins, and no melting occurred on the surrounding snow beyond the exact circular boundaries. The environmental condition appeared confined to precise geometric regions. Thermal imaging performed during a later drone pass confirmed the same pattern recorded earlier in the soil probes. Temperatures inside each circle hovered slightly above freezing. Outside the boundaries, the snowpack remained stable under sub-freezing conditions. The transition between the two environments occurred within only a few centimeters. Snow crystals crossing the boundary melted immediately. Crystals falling just outside the boundary accumulated normally. Over the following days, the circles continued multiplying. Their distribution extended across neighboring farmland parcels where snow had previously remained undisturbed. Farmers inspecting their fields began noticing the openings scattered across winter crops. Each circle displayed identical dimensions and the same sharp boundary separating snow from exposed ground. None of the farmers had installed heating infrastructure capable of producing such behavior. Yet the circles kept appearing. By the end of the second week, aerial imagery revealed more than 100 circular openings distributed across several square kilometers of farmland. The pattern was expanding beyond a single property, and the snow, despite continuing storms across the region, never remained inside them. As the pattern extended beyond the original farm boundary, agricultural authorities expanded the aerial survey grid to include neighboring fields and irrigation corridors. The circles were no longer confined to cultivated land. Several appeared within snow-covered drainage ditches that carried seasonal runoff through the valley. Others formed across abandoned pastureland where no irrigation equipment had ever been installed. Each circle preserved the same geometry first documented during the initial inspection. Snow ended along a precise perimeter. The ground inside remained bare. Thermal measurements collected from multiple sites confirmed the same narrow environmental contrast already observed in the eastern field. Air temperature above the circles remained identical to the surrounding farmland. The atmosphere did not warm. Only the surface conditions inside the circular boundaries changed. Soil temperatures measured a few centimeters below ground level, consistently held just above freezing. Outside the boundaries, soil remained locked below zero. The absence of a gradient remained the most difficult feature to reconcile. The transition between frozen and unfrozen ground occurred over such a short distance that standard environmental models could not account for the behavior through heat transfer alone. Any natural thermal process would gradually disperse energy outward through the surrounding soil. Inside the circles, the warming never spread. It remained contained within the geometric boundary. Drone imaging conducted during a late afternoon survey introduced another layer of complication. Several circles located near the northern irrigation ditch had begun overlapping the edge of a wooden fence line separating two properties. Snow remained intact across the fence rails, yet where the circular boundary crossed the ground beneath the fence, the soil remained exposed. The environmental condition ignored the physical structure. Snow clung to the fence itself. The circle continued beneath it. That observation confirmed that the suppression effect operated within a defined spatial region rather than following ground features or underground infrastructure. The environment inside the circle behaved differently, but only within the exact boundary. Nothing within the surrounding air mass appeared altered. A temporary investigative pause followed while environmental scientists attempted to construct a model capable of producing the observed geometry. One proposal suggested that localized soil chemistry variations might be generating exothermic reactions beneath the surface, though no chemical residue had been detected in any collected sample. Another hypothesis explored the possibility of underground microbial activity producing limited thermal output, yet that explanation failed to account for the precision of the circular boundaries. Several days passed without any change in the behavior of the circles. The pattern across the valley appeared stable. Then a new development occurred during a routine overnight snowfall. Snowfall across the region intensified after midnight, depositing nearly 15 centimeters across fields and roads before morning. When drone operators resumed their aerial survey the following day, the new snow layer revealed an additional characteristic of the phenomenon that had not been visible before. The circles were not stationary. They had shifted again. The movement had been subtle during earlier observations, but the fresh snowfall provided a clean reference layer across the entire valley floor. When the drone imagery compared the new snow coverage with previous mapping data, it became clear that many circles had migrated several meters during the night. Their positions had changed. The snow revealed thin arcs of displaced melt patterns marking the previous locations of the boundaries. The arcs curved gently across the snowfield, indicating that the circles had gradually relocated over time rather than appearing suddenly in new positions. The environmental condition moved across the landscape. The drift followed no obvious topographic pattern. Circles near irrigation channels sometimes moved along the channel banks, while others crossed open farmland without regard to crop rows or property lines. A few approached the paved county road running through the center of the valley. One circle eventually intersected the road itself. Snow had accumulated across the asphalt during the storm. When the circle reached the roadway, the snow inside its boundary vanished overnight, leaving a perfectly round patch of exposed pavement surrounded by white snowpack. Drivers passing through the area the following morning reported nothing unusual about the road surface. Vehicles crossed the exposed patch without traction loss or temperature change detectable inside the cabin. The snow around the patch remained untouched, forming a distinct white ring around the bare asphalt. The circle continued moving slowly across the roadway over the following hours. By late afternoon, it had reached the opposite shoulder and entered the adjacent field. That movement prompted regional authorities to extend monitoring coverage to include transportation infrastructure throughout the valley. The presence of a migrating environmental condition capable of clearing snow from paved surfaces raised questions about potential effects on winter road safety and drainage behavior. Thermal cameras positioned along the highway corridor began tracking the boundaries whenever they crossed major routes. The circles continued appearing across farmland at a steady rate. Their distribution now extended across several neighboring agricultural districts. The pattern no longer resembled a single expanding cluster. Instead, isolated circles began forming at considerable distances from the original eastern field, sometimes appearing in regions where no circles had previously been observed. Each new circle displayed identical geometry and thermal containment. Snow ended at the boundary. Ground remained bare. One of the most revealing observations occurred several weeks after the first circles had been documented. During a midwinter cold surge, regional temperatures dropped well below the seasonal average, freezing shallow groundwater and immobilizing many irrigation systems across the valley. Snow accumulation during that period became unusually heavy. Across the affected farmland, the circles remained open. Snow continued falling into them. It never remained. Snowflakes entering the boundary dissolved before reaching the ground, leaving the interior surface clear despite the intensifying storm. The surrounding snowpack deepened steadily, while the circles retained the same bare surfaces they had displayed since the beginning of the event. Over time, the farmland adapted to the pattern. Farm equipment operators learn to recognize the exposed soil patches during winter field crossings. Farmers occasionally mark the edges with temporary stakes to prevent machinery from driving into soft ground concealed beneath snow cover. Local road maintenance crews incorporated the circles into their winter inspection routes whenever they approached highway corridors. The environmental condition itself continued drifting slowly across the valley. New circles formed. Older ones migrated or faded as snow eventually reclaimed their positions after the boundary passed onward. The underlying soil returned to frozen conditions once the circle moved away, allowing snow to accumulate again without leaving any permanent alteration in the ground. No physical structure beneath the soil ever explained the behavior. The phenomenon simply persisted. Satellite imaging now includes the valley within a seasonal monitoring grid used by agricultural agencies during winter months. The circles appear and disappear across the landscape each year, drifting gradually through farmland and across irrigation corridors without any identifiable source or predictable pattern. Snow continues to fall across the valley during winter storms. And scattered across those snowfields, perfectly circular patches of exposed ground continue to appear where the snow never remains.